Now this car's been running perfect, but all of a sudden, in the snap of a finger, it'll just stop. So the first thing I did and wanted to try to remedy that was change the fuel filter. That's the easiest thing. I went ahead and did that and started it up. Now I was going to take it for a test drive, and it idled. It was sitting in the hot sun. It idled for maybe a minute, and it shut down and it wouldn't start. Well, that was about 5 minutes ago, but I'm going to go ahead and start it up just to show you what it does. If it'll even start, maybe it won't. Well, okay, doesn't want to run at all. That's not good. So before we get too much further into this, I always like to work from the simplest things to the more complicated things. I have an idea that the fuel pump's gone bad, but before I go ahead and look at changing that, I want to check the fuse and the relay for the fuel pump. And that's right here on this car. And there's the EFI 15 amp fuse. That's for the fuel pump, and the fuel pump relay, it's right next to it. Let's check those. First thing I'm going to do is check the fuse. They give you a little tool in here and some extra fuses. We'll pull the fuse out, and that fuse looks beautiful. If it's blown, you'll see a break in there. Sometimes you'll see a black mark where it broke. But this fuse looks perfect. No problem with that. Put that back in. And now let's check the relay. Now to remove this relay, some of them you can just pull out. This one has a little clip, a little tab here on the inside. And you just need to push that out just a little bit. And then it'll release the relay and you can pull it out. And hopefully you can see that little tab's exposed there now. And I've passed where it was locked in. And you just pull it out. Let's take it over the workbench and check it out. This is a 4-pin relay. And I called some auto parts stores and asked them if they could test this for me. And they said they do not test them. So I went online and found a way you can test using a multimeter, and I recommend Ratchets and Wrenches. He's got a good video on how to do this, and we'll go ahead and walk through it and see if this relay's any good. The silver leads are the control circuit, and the copper leads are the switch circuit. So when these two, the silver ones, are activated, it closes the switch. So I want to check with the multimeter if this is good or not. So I've got ground hooked up, and here's power. And when I touch this to the pin, we should hear a click. And I do. So that's fine. All right, with that energized, now I want to check resistance between the switch circuit, and there should be next to 0 resistance. And that tests good. All right, and then the final test to wrap everything up and test everything. Leave power. I got ground here, positive here, but I also hooked up the positive to that pin. And you take your test light, 12-volt test light, and touch it to that pin. And if it lights up, you've got a good relay. Okay, so we know our fuse is good. And now we know our relay is good. We'll plug that back in. Good. Cover back on. Go back and do some more testing. Okay, so my fuel filter didn't fix it, but I went ahead and went to AutoZone and rented a fuel pressure test kit. Of course, you have to pay for it when you get it, but they rent it to you. I think you can keep it 2 or 3 months, up to 2 or 3 months, and still return it. So I got this. It doesn't have a lot of fittings in it. And the trickiest part of all this is finding the right fitting for your car. And once you've got it hooked up, it's easy. And I've pulled the 3 fittings that I need. They provide you with some fuel line, 4 hose clamps, and this fitting here. The pressure gauge will tie in here, and I'm going to tie this into the fuel line, and I'll show you in just a second here. I'm going to tie this into the fuel line. I'm going to put this on this end with the hose clamp, and we'll tie it in, and then I can hook up the pressure gauge, and we'll see if that's our problem. Okay, just to make this a little easier to work on, I'm going to take this cover off. Yours might just snap on. And this one bolts in there and then clips in the back. You just pull that off. Here's my fuel rail right here. So on this particular Toyota, this is a Toyota with the 3.0 V6. It's actually a 1994 model, so it's older, but basically the same thing. It's fuel injected. I got my fuel line coming in over here. The fuel filter is right down here. So the fuel line comes in the bottom of the fuel filter. Then there's a banjo bolt here, and then the fuel line exits there and goes up here. Here's that line I was showing you from the filter. Comes up here, goes under here, and this line right here ties into it and takes it over the fuel rail. So I'm going to release this hose clamp, pull this line off. I'm going to put my T in there, connect that piece of hose that came with the kit over here to this vacuum into the fuel rail, and then we'll be all set up, and I can turn the key and see what it does. It's probably been 20 minutes since the car wouldn't start, so it may or may not start. If it starts and runs, we'll check it. If it doesn't start, we'll also check it and see what's in there. That's not good. We got about 5 pounds of pressure. You want to double check and make sure there's no leaks anywhere. If you got fuel leaking out, you need to tighten up your clamps. Okay, the first thing we're going to do to access the fuel pump in a Toyota is take this bottom seat cushion out. And I just push it back, pull up, and there's 3 snaps in here. And we'll pull this out, move it forward. We need to access this here and clean this up. Now before we get started, taking the cover off and pulling the pump out, obviously there's gas in that tank. So I'm going to disconnect the negative post of the battery. So when I'm unplugging things and working around there, there'll be no sparks. Very, very important, critical. Get that disconnected and out of the way. Now, I don't have any pressure on my system, as you saw. If you have pressure in your tank or pressure on your system, you can find the fuel pump fuse and pull that out. Turn your key, and of course your car is not going to start. Just let it try to start and get the pressure out of the system. And then go back here and start working. Now on this Toyota, thankfully, I can access the fuel pump from up top here. This is the gas tank here. The top of the tank's underneath this floorboard. On your car, you might have to drop your tank. If your tank's back underneath your trunk, there will be 2 straps, and you unbolt those straps, but first you need to drain the gas tank, otherwise that's going to be heavy and dangerous to work with. On this car, Toyota, all I have to do is remove these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 screws, and we'll pull this top off. And I've got a little over half a tank of gas in here. I just don't like working around gas. So I'm going to siphon out as much gas as I can to work on this. And a little tip, one reason that fuel pumps can go bad is because people run their gas too low in their tank. Some people like to run down to empty and just roll into the gas station, and that'll burn up your pump. These fuel pumps are cooled by the gasoline. So you want to always fill your tank when you get around a quarter tank and not go below that. There we go. I know you couldn't see there, but there's a little clip that you push in here to release this connection, and then this pops up. So you just push in on this little tab here, and that'll release it, and you pull straight up. We can set this out of the way. Thank you, Lord. We got a little pressure in the line, a little gas coming out. And then on these fuel lines, I always like to take a pliers and break the seal like that, and then you can pull it off. You just pull, you might bust this. Got a little fuel coming out. I'm gonna open up the gas cap. I guess I should have run the ignition a little bit with the fuse out, let that pressure off. And I want this cleaned up around here because I don't want any of it getting into the gas tank. Working our way out. And then when you get to the float, you got to tip it. We'll let the gas drain out here. There's our strainer and our pump. And we'll take this over to the workbench. Change it out. Just going to set this over the top. That'll seal that off a bit. Okay, here we are. Here's the pump. Here's the strainer. I got a new strainer from Amazon. I got a Bosch pump from eBay. By the way, my pump was $30. And I called Bosch just to make sure I was doing everything right. Very helpful. Their technical support comes with these parts, hose clamps, a new fuel line, and this is a reinforced fuel line, which is great. And the cap that goes on the bottom. And here's the pump. Looks good. That's the pin for the strainer, and then the strainer fits over that. Alright, that popped that out of the bottom. And now I can pull this out of the fuel line and disconnect the wire. There's just a little tab on here. You press that in and pull this out. There we go. Let's see about this fuel line. She's had a life in there. I might cut this one and put it in. They sent a wire and a fitting for this, and I think this plugs in to this one. Yep. And then this goes into this. Good. That goes that way. Now this is just a little bit different. You see you got a little bit of an angle on there. This one comes out straight. So hopefully that's not going to cause a problem anywhere in the tank. But when I talked to Bosch, he said you got to get this strainer because it's the one that goes with it. This holds that on. All locked in place there. Drop that down in. Looking good. Wires all out of the way. We didn't bend the float. Got our new strainer on there. New hose. Let's go throw it back in. Watch that float in the strainer. Not too hard. Good. I can snug these down. And I'm going to go slow and crisscross. Good. Now we can put our hoses back on. Good. Just plug this back in. Good. I'm running out of daylight here, so I'm going to go ahead and test it tomorrow. All right, we got our daylight back. I reconnected the ground to the battery. Now let's fire it up and see if it'll run. Come on, baby. Just like the old girl used to be. That's a great sign. Let's take it out for a drive and see how it runs. I've been driving around for about 20 minutes now, and I think that fuel pump resolved our problem. Well, I've driven about 250 miles on this new fuel pump, and she's been running like a champ. If this video was a help to you, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing, and I look forward to helping you with other projects online.